These episodes take a long time to research, film, edit, and create. So your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing truly means the world to us here at Megalith Alignments. The approach into the Ramesseum feels different. Before the great stone wall rises ahead, rough mud brick remains appear off to the side, humble structures beside a monument built for eternity. Long after Ramesses II built this house of millions of years in the 13th century BC, people reused this sacred ground through later Roman and Coptic periods. Ahead is the Great Pylon Wall, the threshold into Ramesses' world. This wall was Ramesses' message to eternity. The battle scenes show him not as ordinary king, but as a divine warrior, chosen by the gods, defeating chaos and turning history into royal propaganda. Beyond the pylon, this carved megalith reveals the power of Ramesses II's name. The oval cartouches were not just royal labels, they were sacred name rings. In ancient Egypt, a name carried spiritual force, and carving it into stone was a way to make the king eternal. Beside the carved stone, these mud brick walls reveal the working side of the Ramesseum: storage, support spaces, and later reuse. Stone was for eternity. Mud brick was for daily life. Then the fallen giant appears. This shattered colossus was once a massive seated statue of Ramesses II, carved from hard stone and placed to dominate the temple court. Some estimates place the original statue at over 50 feet tall, a monument meant to make the king feel larger than human. But in Egypt, size was symbolic. A statue this massive was not only art, it was a vessel for royal presence. Even broken, it still speaks the same message. Ramesses was building himself into eternity. Here, author, investigative mythologist, and ancient aliens contributor William Henry draws attention to Ramesses II offering incense to Amun. In the scene, Ramesses holds ritual vessels known as new jars, round-bottomed pottery vessels used in ancient Egyptian ceremony. Henry connects these jars to blue lotus and other sacred plant substances, interpreting the scene as more than a simple offering. In his view, this represents a consciousness-shifting ritual, where the pharaoh enters a visionary state and symbolically stands in the presence of the gods. To the ancient Egyptians, contact with the divine came through ritual, scent, sacred plants, and altered states of awareness. Here, only the base remains, a silent pedestal for a statue that once towered above the court. Even at ground level, the carved names and symbols show its purpose. This was not just support stone, but a foundation for Ramesses' eternal image. From the base, the statue's identity comes back into focus. Here lies the head fragment of Ramesses II, still wearing the royal Nemes headdress. Even separated from the body, the face was meant to preserve his presence, calm, divine, and eternal. From the broken head, the temple restores Ramesses in another form. These are Osiride statues. Ramesses II, shown like Osiris, arms crossed with symbols of rule. Here, the king is no longer just ruler of Egypt, but transformed into an eternal, divine being. Beside these statues, the wall continues the same sacred message. Ramesses stands before the gods, offering, receiving blessing, and presenting himself as a king, approved by divine power. Not just for life, but for eternity. These darker carved blocks feel more intentional. They form a sacred entrance, covered with hieroglyphs and royal names, a threshold into the deeper, divine space of the temple. Past the darker entrance blocks, the walls become a sacred record. Ramesses II is shown before the gods, making offerings and receiving divine approval. The figures and hieroglyphs are not random decoration. They identify the king, name the deities, and preserve ritual moments in stone. His cartouches repeat the message again and again. Ramses was chosen, protected, and meant to endure forever. Past the carved walls, the temple opens into a forest of stone. These giant columns once held up the roof of the sacred hall, lifting the ceiling above worshippers like a man-made sky. Their shafts are covered with hieroglyphs, royal cartouches, offering scenes, and divine symbols, each one repeating the same message. Ramesses II was not only ruling Egypt, he was standing in relationship with the gods. Look closely, and traces of color still remain. Red, blue, yellow, and green pigments survive in small places on the carvings and ceiling, reminding us that this temple was never meant to look like bare stone. It was once alive with color, light, and sacred imagery. The tops of the columns rise like lotus and papyrus blossoms, symbols of rebirth, creation, and the Nile itself. In Egyptian belief, the first life emerged from the primeval waters, and the lotus became a sign of the sun rising again. So walking through this hall was not just architecture, it was a symbolic journey through creation, from earth to sky to the divine realm. And as we move between these massive columns, the path turns our attention to a carved scene on the wall, a moment where Ramesses stands before the gods, and the temple begins to speak again. Here, the wall shifts from sacred ritual to royal power. Ramesses II appears in battle imagery, with horses, chariots, enemies, and carved movement across the stone. This was more than history. It was cosmic propaganda, the pharaoh shown defeating chaos, restoring order, and proving that his victories came through divine protection. Even later visitors left their mark here. Among the ancient carvings, we can still see graffiti from the 1800s, including the year 1820, a reminder that this temple has been witnessed, damaged, and remembered across many ages. Between the massive columns, the wall becomes layered with sacred scenes. Ramesses' names, gods, and ritual figures are carved in ordered rows, turning the stone into a permanent record. Even after damage and time, the message remains. This temple was built to keep the king in eternal connection with the divine. As we reach the final walls of the Ramesseum, the temple feels less like a ruin and more like a carved archive. Every surface is covered with signs, gods seated on thrones, Ramesses standing before them, royal cartouches, offering scenes, and long bands of hieroglyphs. These were not random decorations, they were sacred records, designed to preserve the king's relationship with the divine for all time. Looking upward, even the ceilings still hold traces of color. The stone was once painted, glowing with reds, blues, greens, and golds. What we see today as faded sandstone was once a living cosmic chamber, a place where the ceiling became the heavens, the columns became sacred plants, and the walls became a map between earth and the gods. And this is what makes the Ramesseum so powerful. Even broken, even fallen, even thousands of years later, the message still survives. Ramesses II built this temple to defeat time, to make his name eternal. And in many ways, standing here today, reading his walls, walking through his columns, and looking up at what remains of his painted sky, he succeeded. Join us next time as we continue across the West Bank of Luxor to Medinet Habu, the great mortuary temple of Ramesses III. Near ancient Thebes, this massive complex preserves towering walls, battle scenes, sacred courts, and some of the best surviving temple reliefs in Egypt. The story of the warrior pharaoh is not over.